If I were to describe John McKetta in one word,
magnetic,
very outgoing,
heartfelt,
compassionate,
excellence.
I would rather use two words, which is your friend.
From 1915 to 2016, John McKetta saw huge change, and when I studied his childhood, the things that he did not have are notable.
I came from a Ukrainian family. They were unhappy with their situation at home, and everyone heard about the heaven across the Atlantic Ocean. That's what Dad called it.
It was a tight family. He admired his older brother so much and loved his sister. The three of them would travel from town to town with the parents as the seams of coal would dissipate and they'd have to move on.
He started his adult life in the coal fields around Pittsburgh and had to go into the coal mines.
He always wanted to be a coal miner, just like his father and his brother.
Growing up, I couldn't wait until I went to coal mines, until the first day I went in the mine, and I hated it. I couldn't stand it. It was terrible. There was no fan, no movement of air. There were methane gases and high sulfur gases. Coal miners had to work on their belly. It was all pick and shovel. I would say once a month someone was killed. In the next room, Andy Lebowski and his dad suffered a fall. The ceiling came down 600 feet of it, rock. It took us 3 days to find their bodies. It was heartbreaking. But working in the mine was the best thing that ever happened, because the worst job I could get outside of the coal mines was wonderful. I never had a bad job since.
Technology has just raced forward on his watch. He has the stories of growing up huddling around a single radio, listening to news with his neighbors, or sharing a telephone for several families all together.
My dad knew electricity was coming, and he wanted to get into that. He would sit there with the English dictionary and a Ukrainian dictionary and would translate one to the other night after night after night. He was a hard-working guy. He set the example for my brother and me. My brother got me a book on coal carbonization. It told how chemicals were made from coal. And the person who made chemicals from coal was called a chemical engineer. And I just thought, boy, I'd rather make chemicals from coal than dig coal.
Dad was a driven person. He spent the rest of his life getting out of the coal mines and trying to make sure he never had to go back.
He had to work very hard to, even get his first opportunity for, a college education. And he seized that opportunity, and he's done great things with it.
I needed a job. I didn't have any money for tuition. Every night I would write 2 or 3 letters, and it took me a couple months to get the 54 letters out. The only answer I got was the 54th letter. The president of some little school in Indiana wrote me and said, yes, we will admit you, and we will find a job for you somewhere on the campus. I decided I would really like to go into teaching. Since I had some experience in industry and there was a war on, I had offers from Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio State, and all over. But Texas just stood out.
Dad devoted from 1946, I guess it was, forward, just his entire life was spent in trying to build this department even stronger.
I came in 46. The war was over and the veterans came. At University of Texas, we went from 6,800 to 14,000 students in 1 year, and they were wonderful. They'd been overseas fighting for 4 or 5 years. They had a chip on their shoulder, and I want to learn. And I loved that kind of thing. These veterans, it was not unusual for them to say, "Sir." Several of us didn't get what you talked about on your lecture. Could we meet at 4 o'clock? Damned right. You'd have 15 or 20 that would come, and they wanted to know more.
When I think about the influence John's had in the department, I think about the role he's really played in building what we are today. He was pivotal in many of the early decisions and investments to embrace emerging fields that have become the core of chemical engineering.
In the days that I came, I could see that chemicals were coming from gas and oil. Most industry would find out that everything was made of chemicals. You're needed in every area. So things changed a hell of a lot.
Johnny, when he arrived in 1946, was one of the first who set that culture. Really an environment of we are here to solve important national problems.
He knew that quality of the faculty were the keys to the success of an academic program, of a department, and of a university. And he methodically worked with his colleagues to build the reputation and build the excellence of the department.
He was an extraordinary researcher, and he was a prolific writer. He wrote hundreds of technical articles and then edited a fabulous encyclopedia that defined his industry.
I decided I would start an encyclopedia on the design and operation of any chemical that you can think of. That took 47 years for 67 volumes. It's still being used today.
John McKetta's had an enormous impact in terms of the broad chemical engineering field, technically, scientifically, and public policy.
President Nixon named me as chairman of the U.S. Energy Policy Commission. I said, of course, I'll do anything my president asks me. When Nixon left, Jerry Ford asked me, please continue. And then Carter wanted me to stay on, and I was with Reagan. And then the Bush boys, just fantastic people.
Not only was he an outstanding researcher, an outstanding teacher, educator, and an outstanding leader of the profession, he also had the personal side.
I went to UT in the fall of '57. Dr. McKetta was chairman of the department while I was there. It was a little scary going to his class, but that was the class I enjoyed going to the most. But you certainly didn't want to make any mistakes in front of him.
If anyone nodded off or it looked like he was losing attention, he might throw something at you.
I think I still have an indentation on my forehead when Dr. McKetta threw an eraser at me. Dr. McKetta tried to make class fun and interesting.
He always had a 10-minute quiz to start things off, and Johnny had a way of making you think there's got to be some sort of trick question in here.
I first met Dr. McKetta when I was an undergrad student in the early 70s. He was so entertaining and I was so impressed by him. I went home and I was telling my wife, I said, you won't believe this professor. So she came to class with me just to meet Dr. McKetta.
I think that he really contributed to this hard work, hard fun culture of the department. No matter how much they did that shaped the world, no matter how much, what they published, the intensity of the teaching, they always had a lot of fun.
It's hard to be objective from a son's point of view, but I just saw Dad as part and parcel with the engineering department. The friends he had were the other faculty members. The people we would see at picnics would be his students. Dad lived the department.
He and Pinky had picnics for his students every year.
When Mrs. McKetta and I bought 3 acres on Lake Austin, before we ever even mowed the grass, we invited the students, all the students, and they brought their food, and You play baseball, football, do what you want, have your lunch, and bring your date with you and all that. And they loved it and wanted to know, could we do it again? Mrs. McKetta said yes, and she made Mississippi cake for them every time. They always talked about Mrs. McKetta's Mississippi cake.
The romance of the century was Johnny and Pinky.
I remember him telling me the story about when they went on their first date and he asked her to marry him that night. It just stuck with me. It stuck with me because that's just what John McKetta would do.
That was a romance that just overwhelmed the entire time of his teaching at the University of Texas.
I tell people I was born with 4 aces. My mother, father, sister, brother, and I married my 5th ace, and you can't beat 5 aces.
He had this tremendous energy, this tremendous charm and social energy, but also he was very impatient. Her gentleness and ability to keep him calm is, I think, part of his greatness.
When John came to this department, it really wasn't a ranked program. It wasn't a well-known program nationally or internationally. And if you look at the arc of the success of the Department of Chemical Engineering, the arc of the success of the university as a whole, John, it was one of the enablers of that.
When I think of his impact, I could see it both on the profession and also as an educator through his thousands of students and the lives he's touched and the work they've gone on to contribute to the profession.
If you think about the petrochemical industry in Texas and the impact that chemical engineering has had on the United States, where the leaders came from, who they learned from, who they modeled their leadership style after, it was John McKetta.
The fact that we named the school for Johnny has meant a great deal to all of us because it recognizes the impact that he had on our lives and on the lives of the students that are here right now.
I actually did get the opportunity to meet Dr. McKetta very briefly last year at the McKetta tailgate. He was very welcoming and encouraged me to stay in chemical engineering.
My first AICHE meeting on campus, this older man sat down next to me and I kind of looked at him confused as to why he was at a student organization meeting and he had on these awesome Argyle socks. And I found out later that he was John McKetta. I started to look into his story, found out a lot of the things that I loved about the department had come out of John McKetta.
John's impacts have been many. As a researcher, as an educator, but I think his biggest impact is really how supportive and nurturing he has been of the many people he's come into contact with. Everybody always remarks that their life is better because they've met John McKetta.
He takes great pride and has great happiness when you succeed.
The key to any department and the purpose of any department, can you imagine what that is? The student. It's so great to be able to watch the eyes of the man you're talking to and learning new things.
He will be remembered as one of the giants in chemical engineering, but I think the students and the alumni will remember him as just, he was my friend.
Now here's 2 Longhorn ties. They look similar. Okay, they're both really nice looking ties, okay? But one of them is invaluable because on the back, it's got an inscription from Dr. McKetta. And it says, "You'll always be one of my boys."
I think he's made everyone feel part of a family, his family. He made us, he made the faculty, he made the students, he makes the former students. Really, we're just a family.
On your birthday, Dr. McKetta would call you. It's always so special. So I couldn't wait for the phone to ring.
The first time that happened to me, I was driving down the Katy Freeway in Houston and my cell phone rang and it was Johnny McKetta. And we were in traffic. I almost wrecked the car.
When you treat your students like they're your family, yes, you bring them in close, but it allowed John to actually look people in the eye and tell them that he believed that they could do things that they never thought they'd be able to achieve, and that he had high expectations for them, and that he was right there cheerleading for them every step of the way.
For myself and Tom, what John means to us is a father figure, and that means the world to me.
Your students in your class are super special kids, and they deserve to have a high respect from you. They're my kids, and it's your family.